The Silent Crown Birth of Britain's Secret Watchers, London, 1909. The fog rolled thick over the Thames, curling around the lampposts like ghostly fingers. In the heart of the city, behind the imposing walls of Whitehall, a handful of men and women convened in secret, their faces obscured by the dim glow of candlelight. They were not politicians nor soldiers, yet their mission would shape the future of a nation. These were Britain's first covert watchers, the architects of what would become MI6. At the time, Europe was a tinderbox, and whispers of espionage and intrigue flowed freely across borders. Britain, despite its vast empire, lacked a centralized intelligence apparatus to track threats abroad. Every intercepted letter, every curious traveler, every rumor could hide the seed of disaster. It was here, in this crucible of uncertainty, that the idea of a secret intelligence service took root, a shadow network to observe, interpret, and act without ever revealing its hand. The early days were fraught with danger and missteps. Funding was scarce, and the law offered little clarity on the scope of covert operations. Agents operated in the shadows, often relying on improvisation rather than protocol. Couriers were instructed to memorize codes rather than carry written messages. Disguises were crude, yet ingenious. One agent might pose as a humble clerk, another as a tourist, while their true purpose remained hidden even from their neighbors. Yet necessity bred innovation. From the narrow alleyways of London to the grand boulevards of Paris, these nascent agents began to weave a network of observation posts and informants. Messages were encoded in the faintest of signals-marked books. Altered letters, even the positioning of a hat on a windowsill, could carry meaning. Each successful transmission brought a new layer of confidence, but failures were brutal reminders of the stakes. The first breakthrough came unexpectedly. A courier, tasked with transporting intelligence on a clandestine foreign plot, vanished in Brussels. Weeks of silent pursuit ended when MI6 operatives traced the route not by footprints or witnesses, but by subtle behavioral patterns of known contacts. This success marked the beginning of MI6's reputation, that even when the world was blind, they were watching. Within these formative years, the Crown's watchers learned to balance discretion with action. Each misstep taught lessons that would echo for decades: the value of patience, the art of reading subtle cues, and the necessity of secrecy. Agents were trained to blend, to vanish, to exist simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. The London office, a modest suite in Whitehall, became a hub of encrypted communications, with telegraph lines, cipher rooms, and racks of intelligence reports stacked in careful order. Despite these early triumphs, the road was perilous. Rival nations had their own spies, equally skilled and equally desperate. One intercepted letter could ignite diplomatic scandal. One poorly judged approach could compromise an entire network. Yet the founding operatives persevered, driven by loyalty to the Crown and the unspoken understanding that their work, if done correctly, would never be celebrated. Yet it would be remembered in the shadows of history. By the end of the decade, MI6 had evolved from a handful of curious minds into a structured organization. Its agents were no longer merely observers. They were active participants in a subtle, invisible war waged across continents. The groundwork for modern intelligence was laid. Courier systems, early cipher codes, field operatives trained in the art of disguise, and a command structure designed to protect both information and the lives of those entrusted with it. The City of London, cloaked in fog and secrecy, had witnessed the birth of an empire of shadows. From these quiet beginnings, a network would spread across Europe and beyond, learning to anticipate threats before they materialized, to act decisively while leaving no trace, and to become the silent crown that would watch over Britain's interests for generations to come. The year was 1909, and the streets of London were alive with the hum of change. The city seemed oblivious to the secret battles waged in its shadowed corridors. In a modest office tucked away in Whitehall, a small cadre of determined men and women wrestled with the monumental task of creating Britain's first formal intelligence organization. MI6, though still unnamed to the world, was emerging from uncertainty into structure. The first challenge was legitimacy. British law provided little guidance on covert operations, and Parliament had no blueprint for an intelligence service that operated in secrecy. Every move had to be calculated, every risk measured. Agents newly recruited from universities. The military and diplomatic circles were given minimal training and maximum responsibility. Mistakes could mean diplomatic catastrophe or loss of life. Yet the urgency of European tensions, rising nationalism, espionage networks, and the shadow of impending war demanded immediate action. Funding was a constant obstacle. There were no large budgets, no sprawling headquarters, only a handful of rooms, a few telegraph lines, and the unwavering commitment of its staff. To make ends meet, early operatives improvised. They crafted disguises from ordinary clothing, developed coded messages hidden in mundane correspondence, and relied on personal ingenuity over formal procedure. Every agent became a self-taught master of observation, communication, and subterfuge. Operations, though rudimentary, began to take shape. Couriers traveled across Europe, memorizing intelligence rather than carrying written documents. Every encounter with a foreign contact was fraught with tension. One misstep could unravel weeks of delicate planning. Early missions were often perilous, testing both nerves and loyalty. Yet every success, no matter how small, strengthened the fledgling organization's resolve. Among the notable early operations was the interception of a network attempting to smuggle sensitive documents out of continental Europe. The MI6 agents, operating under false identities and traveling incognito, tracked subtle patterns, a repeated postal route, a series of coded messages hidden in mundane letters, and the movements of unremarkable couriers. Each discovery brought MI6 closer to understanding the complex web of espionage that spanned nations. And each small victory was a lesson in precision, patience, and secrecy. The internal structure of MI6 began to solidify during this period. Offices were organized, telegraph lines encrypted, and cipher protocols developed to secure communications. Agents were assigned territories, yet were trained to act independently when circumstances required. Mentorship played a critical role as experienced operatives guided newcomers in the arts of disguise, surveillance, and intelligence collection. The weight of responsibility was immense, yet the team pressed forward, united by loyalty to the crown and belief in the necessity of their work. Challenges continued to mount. Rival powers had established their own intelligence networks, some more experienced and better funded than MI6. The young agency had to contend with deception, counterintelligence, and the constant threat of exposure. Yet in these trials, MI6 learned resilience. Each mistake was a lesson, each failure a stepping stone toward mastery. By navigating these early challenges, the agency laid the foundation for decades of covert operations, building both capacity and credibility. By the end of this period, MI6 was no longer an informal assembly of curious minds. It had become a functioning intelligence body, capable of monitoring threats, deploying agents abroad, and providing vital reports to decision-makers. The early struggles, far from weakening the organization, had forged a culture of innovation, adaptability, and discretion. The Crown's watchers were no longer merely observers. They were active participants in a hidden war, shaping events from behind a veil of secrecy. London itself remained unaware of the empire of shadows growing within its midst. From the fog-laden streets to the hushed halls of Whitehall, Britain's covert force had begun to carve its invisible presence into the fabric of the nation. MI6 was taking root, and though the world would not yet recognize it, the Silent Crown was preparing to become one of the most formidable intelligence organizations in history. By 1912, MI6 had grown beyond the narrow confines of London, its tendrils spreading silently across Europe, from the cobbled streets of Paris to the grand avenues of Berlin. The fledgling agency began to establish an intricate network of observation posts and informants. The cityscapes were bustling with life, yet beneath the ordinary routines. Invisible eyes were watching, recording, and interpreting every signal that could hint at impending danger. Agents traveled under countless aliases, their true identities hidden even from those closest to them. One might be a lecturer in Vienna, another a diplomat in Brussels. Their work required blending seamlessly into foreign society, observing with meticulous attention to detail, and returning intelligence that was often subtle, yet invaluable. In an era before radio encryption became common, the MI6 relied on ciphers, invisible links, encoded correspondence embedded within seemingly mundane communications. Europe itself was a powder keg. Nationalism surged, alliances shifted, and rumors of plots and conspiracies circulated like wildfire. MI6 agents faced not only the threat of exposure, but also the delicate task of gathering actionable intelligence without sparking international tensions. Each mission demanded precision and patience. A single misstep could compromise months of work or jeopardize diplomatic relations. Yet these young operatives, often in their 20s and 30s, displayed a resilience and ingenuity that would become legendary in the decades to follow. One of the earliest successes in this European theater involved intercepting communications between rival factions plotting to destabilize Britain's strategic interests abroad. MI6 operatives identified patterns in travel, correspondence, and seemingly random social interactions. By connecting disparate clues, a misdelivered package, an unusual visitor at a hotel, or the placement of a newspaper they pieced together, a covert web of activity that threatened to go unnoticed by conventional authorities. The success of these operations demonstrated the agency's unique ability to see what others could not, establishing a reputation for foresight and discretion. The agency's methods were evolving rapidly. Field agents now carried photographic equipment, notebooks encoded with ciphers, and miniature tools for observation and communication. Hand signals, hidden marks, and prearranged cues allowed teams to coordinate across cities without ever meeting in person. This growing sophistication marked a turning point. MI6 was transforming from a modest, London-based initiative into a continental intelligence power. Yet the work was not without peril. Counterintelligence efforts by rival nations intensified, and agents often found themselves in morally ambiguous and dangerous situations. One operative, traveling under an assumed identity in Eastern Europe, narrowly avoided capture by relying on quick thinking and an elaborate disguise. Another, stationed in Berlin, managed to relay critical intelligence despite constant surveillance, using coded messages hidden in letters of innocuous content. These tales of silent heroism formed the backbone of MI6's early legend actions, taken in shadows that would later define its reputation. MI6 also began cultivating relationships with sympathetic contacts across borders: journalists, diplomats, academics, and even merchants whose ordinary activities masked their critical role in information gathering. By understanding the subtle rhythms of European society, the agency gained insights far beyond what raw observation could achieve. Every intercepted rumor, every whispered conversation, and every coded letter contributed to a broader understanding of continental affairs. A hidden map of threats and opportunities that would guide Britain's foreign policy for decades. The lessons of these formative years were profound. Agents learned to trust intuition as much as evidence, to anticipate moves before they occurred, and to operate in uncertainty without hesitation. MI6's network, though still small compared to the intelligence forces it would one day rival, had become a finely tuned instrument of vigilance, a crown that watched, not with brute force, but with subtle, persistent observation. As Europe edged closer to the storm of the Great War, MI6 stood poised, ready to expand its influence and refine its craft. The silent watchers had learned to move unseen, to strike when necessary, and to weave intelligence into the fabric of national security. The shadows of Europe were theirs to navigate, and within them, the empire of Britain's secret watchers grew stronger, laying the foundation for a century. of covert operations that would alter the course of history without ever revealing a single public face. The summer of 1914 cast a long shadow over Europe. Nations mobilized, armies marched, and the world teetered on the brink of an unprecedented conflict. For MI6, the outbreak of the Great War transformed every lesson learned in secret into urgent action. The agency, still young and untested, faced the monumental challenge of monitoring threats on a scale never before encountered. The quiet streets of London gave way to a bustling command center where intelligence flowed like lifeblood through telegraphs, messengers, and coded dispatches. Field agents, trained in years of silent observation and subtle persuasion, now found themselves at the heart of a continental storm. In Paris, Berlin, Vienna, and beyond, MI6 operatives moved with unprecedented autonomy, navigating hostile territories, gathering critical information, and returning it to London under the strictest secrecy. The stakes were immense. One misjudged signal, one exposed agent could alter the course of the war. Yet the lessons of the early years had prepared them to act decisively, to adapt swiftly, and to vanish without a trace. The war also accelerated the development of cryptography and counterintelligence within MI6. The agency established secure cipher rooms, trained dedicated codebreakers, and collaborated with allies to intercept and decode enemy communications. The famous Silent War of Intelligence was waged far from the battlefields, where strategy was influenced not only by soldiers and artillery, but by the unseen work of Britain's covert watchers. One of MI6's most daring operations involved infiltrating a network of foreign agents attempting to sabotage critical supply lines to the British front. Agents posed as neutral traders, diplomats, and journalists, using forged documents and impeccable timing to avoid detection. Their reports, detailing troop movements and logistical vulnerabilities, allowed the British command to anticipate enemy maneuvers and protect key positions. These operations, carried out in utter secrecy, exemplified the agency's growing skill in shaping the outcomes of the war without ever stepping into the public eye. The agency's reputation for ingenuity and discretion expanded during this period. Agents employed increasingly sophisticated disguises, hidden observation posts, and clandestine courier systems. A single operative might be responsible for multiple cities, coordinating a network that spanned borders and languages. The MI6 of 1914 to 1918 was no longer a small collection of observers. It had become a disciplined, strategic, and highly adaptive organization capable of influencing events on a continental scale. The human cost was ever present. Agents risked capture, imprisonment, and execution, yet their resolve never wavered. Each success reinforced the invisible crown that MI6 represented a silent force protecting the empire's interests. Stories circulated quietly among operatives of daring escapes, clever ruses, and messages delivered under impossible circumstances. These accounts, while never publicly celebrated, became legendary within the walls of Whitehall, inspiring a new generation of intelligence officers. By the end of the Great War, MI6 had solidified its place as an indispensable arm of Britain's national security. The agency had transformed from a fledgling experiment into a sophisticated instrument of covert operations, capable of shaping events with precision and subtlety. The war had tested its methods, refined its techniques, and forged its identity. The silent crown that had begun in shadowed rooms over London had now extended across Europe, prepared to meet the challenges of a turbulent post-war world and beyond. London's fog-laden streets remained unaware of the invisible battles fought in the name of national security. MI6 had emerged stronger, sharper, and wiser. Its operatives, forged by the trials of war, carried forward a legacy of discretion, ingenuity, and unyielding commitment. The agency would continue to evolve, adapting to new threats, mastering emerging technologies, and maintaining a presence that was felt but never seen, a crown forged in silence, watched over by those trained to move unseen yet act decisively. The armistice of 1918 left Europe scarred but alive, and the world was entering a new era. For MI6, the cessation of open hostilities did not signal peace. It signaled evolution. The agency, forged in the fires of the Great War, now faced the subtler, more insidious threats of espionage, diplomacy, and emerging technology. Silent watchers were needed more than ever, for the lines of influence, power, and information had become invisible, yet infinitely consequential. London's MI6 office, once a modest suite, had grown into a structured network of departments, cryptography, field operations, analysis, and international liaison. The lessons learned in the chaos of war were codified into methods and protocols. Couriers no longer relied solely on memory. Coded messages, microfilm, and concealed compartments enhanced the speed and security of intelligence. Agents were trained to blend, vanish, and act with discretion that bordered on artistry. Their work remained unseen, yet its impact was felt across continents. The interwar years were a proving ground. Europe was a landscape of shifting alliances, ideological experimentation, and fragile peace. MI6 operatives monitored political movements, intercepted communications, and identified emerging threats before they matured into crises. Their influence extended beyond national borders, quietly shaping policies, uncovering conspiracies, and preventing destabilization. Every report sent to Whitehall carried weight. Every observation could tip the balance of diplomacy or safeguard the empire's strategic interests. One notable initiative involved monitoring revolutionary groups and political agitators in major cities from Berlin to Moscow. Agents worked under assumed identities, sometimes posing as academics, merchants, or journalists, cultivating networks of informants who provided intelligence that could not be obtained through conventional means. MI6 understood that influence was as vital as information. The agency's reach extended not only through what it knew, but through subtle interventions in the world of diplomacy and perception. Technology began to redefine the invisible lines. Telegraphy, radio signals, and early mechanical encryption became crucial tools. MI6 invested in understanding these systems, training a generation of operatives in signal interception and cryptography. Even a minor intercepted message could prevent a scandal, protect national security, or reveal the machinations of a foreign power. The agency was no longer merely reacting. It was anticipating, shaping outcomes before rivals even understood the moves being made against them. The human element remained central. Agents were meticulously selected for intellect, discretion, and adaptability. They became masters of cultural nuance, understanding foreign societies and reading subtleties that others overlooked. Through careful observation, agents could discern intentions from gestures, loyalty from pretense, and hidden plans from casual conversation. This invisible intelligence became MI6's most potent weapon, network of minds operating in concert, united by a commitment to silent, effective oversight. By the mid-1920s, MI6 had established a presence in all major European capitals, often without any official recognition. The agency's operatives were embedded in embassies, businesses, and universities, their work undetectable yet indispensable. The Crown's watchers had transcended the battlefield. They now navigated the intricate, invisible lines of power, diplomacy, and influence, ensuring that Britain's interests were safeguarded, even in peacetime. The agency's growing reputation, though still largely unknown to the public, spread quietly among foreign intelligence services. MI6 was no longer merely a wartime instrument. It had become a permanent, adaptive force capable of shaping events across borders without leaving a trace. The Silent Crown had evolved, learning that the most decisive victories often occurred not on maps or battlefields, but in the subtle orchestration of information, perception, and secrecy. As the 1930s dawned, MI6 had emerged from the shadows of history into a global force, quietly shaping events far beyond Britain's shores. The agency, once a handful of determined observers, had grown into a sophisticated intelligence network, adept at anticipating threats, influencing outcomes. and protecting national interests with unparalleled discretion. Europe, still simmering with political tension and ideological shifts, remained a landscape of silent battles where spies, not armies, often decided the fate of nations. The legacy of MI6's early years was unmistakable. The lessons of improvisation, patience, and meticulous observation had become embedded in the culture of the organization. Agents operated under complex cover identities, navigated shifting alliances, and managed invisible networks that spanned continents. Diplomacy and espionage were no longer separate. MI6's silent hand influenced both, often without the world ever realizing it. Their presence was a subtle but constant reassurance to Britain that the Crown's interests were protected, even in the most volatile circumstances. In this era, the agency embraced new technologies and methodologies. Telegraph lines, radio communications, and encrypted codes became essential instruments in the silent symphony of intelligence. Agents were trained to interpret signals, understand psychological patterns, and anticipate moves before adversaries could act. MI6's ability to operate in secrecy while delivering decisive intelligence earned it a reputation among foreign services as formidable, precise, and invisible, a crown that watched, guided, and protected without ever revealing its face. Despite its power, MI6 remained largely unknown to the public. The world saw only diplomats, politicians, and military leaders, never the intricate web of watchers operating behind the scenes. Yet those within Whitehall knew that Britain's security, its strategic decisions, and even its global influence often depended on the unseen work of these operatives. The silent crown had proven that the most potent influence often occurred in the shadows, away from headlines, yet shaping the course of history with every carefully gathered intelligence report. The Great War, the interwar years, and the early development of the modern intelligence apparatus had forged a culture of vigilance, discretion, and adaptability. MI6 had become synonymous with silent observation, strategic foresight, and the art of moving unseen. The agency's foundation in London, its networks across Europe, and its methods of intelligence gathering created a blueprint that would guide Britain through decades of geopolitical turbulence and shifting global landscapes. From the vantage point of the present, the work of these early watchers can be appreciated not only for its historical significance, but for the enduring principles it established: patience, adaptability, secrecy, and unwavering commitment to duty. The Crown's watchers, though never celebrated in the public eye, became the silent guardians of an empire navigating a complex world. Their legacy is a testament to the power of intelligence conducted in shadows, where victory often comes without recognition but with profound consequence. Disclaimer: this video content is created for informational and documentary purposes only. Based on available historical and verified sources, the channel does not take sides or pass moral or political judgments, and all interpretations are meant solely for educational insight. Hello everyone! I have an important question for you. Where are you watching this from? If you enjoy this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Leave your comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Also, help us reach our next milestone by supporting the channel. Your engagement keeps these documentary stories alive and allows us to bring more fascinating spy histories to you.